Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar produced by Business Performance USA. We are honored to have you as our guests, and we know you will gain a great deal from today's presentation. Business Performance USA produces weekly webinars on Tuesday at noon Central to provide business insights on a variety of topics important to business professionals. Business Performance USA is a voluntary association that provides online business information exchange. When you become a member, you can meet people from across the U.S. engaged in business conversations on topics such as we are presenting today. You may become a member at no cost and engage at any time. Just go to businessperformanceusa.org, sign up as a member, and one of the many benefits that you will receive is that you can hear on demand all of the webinars we have presented to date, including this series that Matt Graham will be giving you today on background screening. And you can listen at a time that's most convenient to do for you. Now, our webinar today is the Basic Truths of Background Screening, Part 7. It's 10 power screening tips that your competitors don't want you to know. And we're looking forward to this. And let me introduce myself. Let me get that slide to switch. It's gone to sleep. It'll take for just a minute. But I am Cynthia Stewart, managing partner. Well, there we go. It went to sleep. I'm Cynthia Stewart, managing partner with Evermore Services, and I'm your partner in building tomorrow's businesses today. I will be your host for this hour. Your executive presenter today is Matt Graham of Track One. And Track One is a background screening firm that's very well immersed inside the background screening. They're very well accredited and so forth, and I'm going to tell you more about them. Let me just say that I want to make sure that this hour is worth your time. You'll use the question feature on the control panel, and it's a little hand. You just hit that and ask a question. I'll be monitoring those and make sure that Matt has time to answer those. Also, if you have a question at any time, you can send me an email, cynthia@businessperformanceusa.org. And again, like I said, watch our on-demand webinars at businessperformanceusa.org. Okay, with that, what I'd like to do is go ahead and introduce Matt Graham. Matt is an attorney, and he works as the Vice President of Operations of Track One Technology, Inc. They are a very well-established background screening firm. He has over 15 years of experience in employment practices, and he joined Track One at the beginning of 2011 and helped the company to become one of only 42 companies to attain accreditation by the National Association of Professional Background Screeners. Matt serves on the Best Practices Committee of NAPBS and co-chairs the Data Breach Prevention Subcommittee. He's one of only 40 people to actually be certified at the advanced level in the Fair Credit Reporting Act by NAPBS. We hope you see that with his the company's accreditations and his certifications, he is very well versed and very knowledgeable in the subject that we have at hand. With that, Matt, I'd like to go ahead and pass the screen over to you, and we will let you get started.
Yep, thank you for that. Looks like the presentation is coming up. Just one second, and you should see my screen at this point.
And we do, Matt. Thank you.
Again, well, thank you for that introduction. I appreciate this, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to all of the members out there. Yeah, this is a really interesting topic. As you can see, we're already up to part 7 of this series. There's quite a bit of information to cover, but fortunately, we've been able to break it down into some bite-sized pieces, and this is one of those bites. We're talking about 10 power screening tips today. Some of the previous webinars that we've had on this topic really dive down into some of the deeper levels into things like compliance and other Fair Credit Reporting Act standards, but this one is going to be a really quick run through some tips on background screening. So the first one that we'll look at is the power screening tip number 1, which is talking about credit reports. And this has really garnered a lot of attention in the news lately. Many states have been enacting laws that will limit employers' ability to look into credit reports on their prospective employees. And part of the rationale for that is, I guess, part of coming out of the economic downturn that we experienced. A lot of people's credit reports kind of got a little messy. And the idea that the EOC has and other agencies that are out there to protect consumers and to protect employees, they're really looking to eliminate barriers to employment. And so unless there is some sort of economic or financial or fiduciary responsibility tied to particular positions, states are looking to limit employers' ability to look into the financial backgrounds of their applicants. It sort of makes sense. I mean, there's a limited few reasons why you would need to know this information, and so states have started to carve out some exceptions in their laws. So even though there's 10 states now that have passed legislation that have limited credit report access, typically there are still some ways that the employers can get access to that information. And the biggest one is, again, what we talked about is the fiduciary responsibility, access to cash, access to financial records. So what seems like initially a prohibition on credit reports can quite quickly, that opens back up to you. And some of the states have even set very low thresholds with respect to salaries for employees. If an employee makes more than $25,000, it's still okay to run the credit report. So while I would advise you to look at your state's laws with respect to credit report access, just know that the fiduciary responsibility, financial access, even a cashier having access to cash would qualify in many of these cases. But because it's a normal question to ask, since I've told you there's 10 states, I'll run through those right now for you so you can see if your state is one of those where you need to do some additional research. The states now, as they stand, are California, Connecticut, Colorado, Hawaii, Illinois, Maryland, Nevada, Oregon, Vermont, and Washington. It is kind of a growing trend, so I would kind of watch out for this if you think it's a concern. Many of you may not be running credit reports at all. You may just have normal rank and file employees. But if you're hiring for your CFO position or anybody that's working in your accounting, accounts payable, just know that that probably is still open to you, and it's not as much of a prohibition as you might expect. So that's screening tip number 1, and we'll move on now to our screening tip number 2. Using MVR, or motor vehicle record search, to find any driving functions, or violations for people that are doing driving functions. Really what this means is if you have somebody that's going to be driving on behalf of the organization, even if that's not their core function. Obviously, anybody with delivery drivers that's going out into the public and using a company vehicle, that is probably the first and foremost position. But even some folks that your administrative personnel that may be going down to the local bakery to pick up some baked goods for a meeting that you're having the next morning, that type of person, there would be a legitimate need for you to understand the person's driving history. Even if they're using their personal vehicle, there can still be some liability in cases where somebody is driving on behalf of a business. So MVR reports will tell you quite a bit of information. They can be used to pull up any type of violations or infractions. They can pull up information about proof of insurance. So they can be valuable reports just to help limit liability in cases where you have employees driving on behalf of the organization. One area where you might not immediately think of, but say you have a warehouse situation and you have forklifts or pallet jacks that are kind of more so than just your standard hand carts. I've seen some people whip through Lowe's or Home Depot and on their little forklifts and maybe not following the most safest of practices. Well, a person's driving history might also kind of give you some indication at how they might be operating your equipment, four-wheeled equipment. Another situation where you might think of is a greenhouse or a golf course where they have little Cushman type vehicles that drive around. These are very much like motor vehicles, and in some cases are just as powerful with gasoline engines. And a person's behavior behind the wheel of a car can certainly translate over into those situations. So may not be, again, what comes to first to mind, but that's what we're trying to do here, is kind of get you to think of what information can you find out about the employees that's relevant to their job function. Any questions about the motor vehicle records?
No questions, thank you.
Great, then we'll head on to our screening tip number 3. And as the screens are syncing for everybody, this should come up. What we're dealing with in number 3 is the verifying previous employment. And this is always kind of the tricky one. While background check companies can certainly provide this service, a lot of the companies that we speak to, they think they can do this themselves. And while it's true that sure you can pick up a phone just as easy as we can and make calls, we have a team of verifiers here at Track One that have been kind of trained and are pretty adept at eliciting information where it's not always easy to get that information. So many folks are concerned about libel and slander. They're very reluctant to give any information out about former employees. Typically what you can get is the name, rank, and serial number. But again, we've got some ways of getting more information, actually doing employment references rather than just verifying the bare facts. One question that's really good, and it typically doesn't set off too many alarms at the other end, is asking whether or not that employee is eligible for rehire. So many times that can tell you really the information that I think most people are looking for when they call up, and too often get just the name and dates of employment. That eligibility for rehire is a good question. Think about how you use that inside your own operations with employees that are going through your organizations. If someone were to ever represent themselves, if you would hire them back, that speaks volumes with really not having to say too much. So that's one question that we do incorporate into our employment verification. And there are some other things that you can do too. Oftentimes people, believe it or not, will generate fake references and fake jobs, and they say, here, call this number, he was my boss. And really it's just it's nothing more than an elaborate ruse. So there are other ways that you can verify employment that actually, access official records. And one of those is using what we refer to here as an SSN check, which actually pulls from a person's credit header. So it's not actually pulling their credit report, so it doesn't run afoul of any of the rules that we saw in the previous tips. But it actually, what it does is pulls up affiliated employers, and that's done through W-2, income history, that type of thing. So that's one way to verify employment, is if the organization appears on that report as a affiliated employer, that's a good way to verify that information. It's also a good way to, in some cases, pull up employers that were not listed on the application. A lot of times, if an applicant has kind of a bad experience, or they know they're not going to get a good reference because they did some bad things at a former employer, they won't list that employer on their application, and sometimes you'll see gaps. In some cases, the applicant will try to explain that by, well, I was self-employed, and so you're not going to see anything during that time period. If you see something that pops up during a gap period as an employer on that SSN check report, that might give you an additional source of follow-up. Contact that employer that shows up and says, tell me about this employee, and you might get some information that would be surprising. Now, speaking to the self-employment concept, there are ways that if somebody has a legitimate, self-employment type situation, that you can get information about that, is ask for some references from clients. That would be a good thing you can do, is follow up with people that they served as that self-employed person, and see what kind of reference you can get from that from the clients. Again, that's going to be a situation where you're going to be somewhat reliant upon the applicant provided information. But as you go through this process, if you start to get a sense that there's something awry there, you've got to trust your gut. And then all of the interview process is really about that trust-building relationship anyway. So it's not impossible, but slightly more difficult to get information about those that are self-employed. But the employment history, that's a really good way to find out what this particular applicant is likely to be like in your situation. Is people's pasts often kind of tend to repeat themselves. So if they had a good experience with one employer, that hopefully will be a good sign that they're going to be a good, upstanding employee at your side. Any questions on the power tip number 3, past employment?
No questions. And folks,
Great.
if you do
We'll
have
take a look
questions,
at number.
please go ahead and type those in the question box.
Perfect. Thank you. Number 4, just like you can verify past employment, you can also verify people's education history, what degrees they've attained, any type of certifications and credentials. Think about professional licenses in this case. So, while sometimes it's easy to gloss over this and look at somebody's educational history and think, well, why would they lie about that? Or it's so easy that I can go check this. Why would they even give it a shot? Well, if you remember, it was about May of 2012, I think, that the CEO of Yahoo had to step down after just 4 months into his tenure there. Apparently, he had padded his resume with some information about a computer science degree. I think it was Stonehill College, and where he tripped up was he claimed that he attained his degree 4 years before they started awarding computer science degrees. So a simple check of or verification of education credentials can spot that. And again, that's another service that we can provide. You can always call up the bursar, the registrar at the college yourself, but so many agencies or educational institutions have kind of routinized that process and are working more closely with consumer reporting agencies like ourselves that sometimes it's difficult for you as an individual employer to get that information, whereas we have those pre-established relationships and can do that pretty quickly. There's a couple of resources actually that have been set up, kind of a clearinghouse of student records, which we can tap into directly. So degrees, again, that's one area where you want to make sure that, especially with your high-profile individuals like a CEO, you want to make sure they have what they say you are on, or say that they have. But you also need to look at professional licenses and certifications. We actually do quite a bit of the research for doctors in Oklahoma, making sure that they have the right credentials. So licenses, those are things that we can verify. Other certifications, we can do all of that for you. So really, when it comes down to it, when you're looking at an individual resume, you just want to make sure that everything on there checks out. Unfortunately, I think the latest SHRM studies, the Society of Human Resource Management, shows that about 30% of resumes include some fraudulent information. So that's certainly an area where you would want to concentrate and make sure that they've got everything that they said that they have. Any questions about the education verification or certifications or credentials?
No questions, Matt.
All right, we'll move on to number 5. Personal references. This is actually one that I think is probably too often overlooked. I guess people have kind of gotten into the cynical mindset that why would anybody put a personal reference on there that they are not going to give a glowing recommendation? Well, actually, you know what? Since we do so many of these, it's sometimes surprising the information that comes out. Sometimes when people get started talking, they just can't stop, even though they don't mean to. Especially when you have a skilled person on the other side of the conversation, like we have here, that really know the right questions to ask. We're seeing this happen a lot now. A lot of our volunteer organizations are using personal reference checks as a means to get information that might not otherwise show up. Think about it for a minute. When you're looking at a person's criminal history or credit history, those stand out as pretty obvious items. But especially with the criminal history, if somebody hasn't been convicted of the crime, there's no criminal record. And the joke around here is that it's the good ones that haven't been caught yet. So while a person's criminal record may be clear, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not a bad actor. And so sometimes with the personal references, that is a good way to spot some red flags that might not otherwise have shown up. So the best way to do these is have open-ended questions. We operate from a fairly standard script with respect to our personal reference questions, but we do allow each customer to kind of customize that list. And if there are any particular areas, so for example, with our volunteer organizations that have people that are coming in working with children, we have a special set of questions that are designed to elicit any type of red flags with respect to boundary type issues. So if you have somebody that's going into maybe a customer service position, we have ways of asking questions that elicit responses that deal more with their demeanor and their ability to handle stress and those types of things. So I wouldn't just immediately discount personal references because I think they are still of value. They just have to be done in the right way, and then you can really get some details that don't show up otherwise. Any questions on our tip number 5?
So, Matt, you are saying
Okay.
that the company should go ahead and do personal reference checks, but making the point that those that do these more frequently seem to be able to get, because they're just more experienced at it, and they probably have more broader relationships, they're able to get more information. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are quite a few people in the HR function that have also developed the ability to, for lack of a better way to put it, kind of develop a BS detector, and through using those skills, can talk to these individuals that have been listed as references. Can kind of tell when they're getting maybe either a rehearsed pitch, or sometimes your applicant may have coached the friend that's serving as the personal reference. But even in those situations, we've actually had several of our verifiers make calls and get information that starts off kind of nice and neat, and all of a sudden they're telling us about the time that person got drunk, and that's it's kind of an art that gets developed over time. But again, we have the ability to do that, and this is certainly one of those functions that doesn't take any special access. So employers can do this for themselves, but too often it just kind of becomes more of a cursory or kind of more perfunctory, whereas we know how to do it more in depth.
Thanks, Matt.
So moving on to power screening tip number 6, drug testing. This right here could really be a webinar into itself. The amount of complexity that has kind of evolved in the drug testing area is really just kind of taken an exponential increase. From Colorado and Washington State to legalizing marijuana to some degree. In direct contrast to federal law, which creates a whole set of crazy legal questions. It's even though those states have decriminalized marijuana use, it doesn't necessarily mean that employers have to accept that in their place of business. Smoke breaks don't necessarily have to include marijuana smoke breaks. And so the issues of security and safety really are paramount, and employers that are now facing these situations where marijuana use has been decriminalized still have an obligation to ensure a safe workplace. So drug testing has not really been impacted, and employers' abilities to inquire into the behavior and habits of their employees hasn't been impacted, but it's still kind of a tricky area to navigate because every state does have its own requirements, and it really does take kind of a state-by-state analysis for you to develop a drug screening program that doesn't run afoul of any of the state rules. So fortunately, we have a network of laboratories that we work with for specimen collection. So it's an easy process for both the applicant and the employer. But through that network, we've also developed an expertise and an understanding of the state law process. So, you know, some organizations have mandatory policies and random drug testing. Even the way in which the random samples are generated is sometimes governed by state law. We also have, you know, developed a pretty good network of, like I said, the laboratories that deal with the specimen collection. But we also have some folks that can come on site and do collection there, which can be especially valuable in the case of post-incident. So if there's an accident on site, you know, we can help out with that as well. But the same thing that applies to most of the background screening applies to drug testing. Really, it's best to have that as part of a post-conditional offer. So rather than screening every applicant on the front end, you know, perhaps even prior to them having an interview, those are situations where you need to make sure that you're not running afoul of any state laws. Most states will allow for a drug test to be conducted on reasonable suspicion. So if someone is walking through your office in a bit of a cloud surrounding them and a haze and an odor of marijuana and slurred speech, other signs of marijuana use, I guess that could even include a Doritos bag in their hand, but I'll let you decide on that. You know, we have to allow for that reasonable suspicion thing to be in there, and most states have. But there's also, again, as I mentioned, kind of the exponential increase in the complexity of matters with synthetic drugs and new types of illegal substances being created all the time. It really kind of requires you to give some thought to what you're testing for. And so what you see there at the last piece of the slide with the 5-panel, 7-panel, 10-panel, these are all different types of tests that will test for the illicit substances. Each panel basically is a test for a particular type of substance. So the 5, the 7, the 10, respectively, will test for additional types of substances. And there are add-on things that can be done. So it really kind of requires you to be a little in tune with the, unfortunately, the illicit drug scene in your particular area. Some cases, unfortunately, like my home state, Oklahoma, has a particular problem with methamphetamines. Other states have issues with other drugs. I guess I believe this is a horse tranquilizer called ketamine, so sometimes known by its street name of Special K. And I only know these things because I love Law and Order, and that's the only way I'm familiar with it. That, and we do a lot of that work here. So it kind of depends upon what are the popular drugs in your area as to what panels you go with and what additional drugs you might test for. So with all kidding aside, it does help to know the types of things that are prevalent in your area to get the best use out of your drug screening dollars. Any questions about the drug screening?
We do. We have several questions. The first one is, can drug testing be used if you suspect someone is drunk?
Yeah, I mean, drug and alcohol typically are treated in a similar fashion. In fact, I mean, we actually do have alcohol testing that's available. Obviously, because alcohol leaves the system much more quickly than other drugs, it's you know, imperative that you have access and can quickly get somebody to the laboratory that can administer an effective test for that. But absolutely, the reasonable suspicion applies equally to drugs and alcohol. So if you suspect someone's drunk, you can start that investigation on the spot there.
And I think it was a timing issue. It
Next
clearly
question.
is. So the next question is, what about, let me make sure I can see this. What about states that marijuana is legal? Would you still be able to test?
Absolutely. As I said before, with although the states have decriminalized the use and possession to certain extents of marijuana, it's still not legal at a federal level, and it's still not that the decriminalization has not impacted the employer's ability to prohibit that on their premises. So just because somebody has uh, well, what I'm about to mention too is the medical marijuana. That's a whole other area where somebody may have a prescription to use it for medicinal purposes. A lot of people suffering from glaucoma or other forms of cancer treatment have a prescription for marijuana. But again, that doesn't take away the employer's rights to prohibit that use on their premises, or even just prior to and someone showing up intoxicated. So. Employers are still protected, and as I mentioned before, they're really obligated to provide a safe work environment. Just because certain states have decided to decriminalize use or possession for recreational purposes doesn't impact that.
And this will be the last question at this point, and we'll tee up some of these others for later. But um, what about any kind of a requirement for a social health and fitness assessment? Would those help as well with regard to drug screening or finding out more? Would you be able to use those, and could they require that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That opens up a whole other area that didn't quite make it to a screening tip. But oftentimes, the same set of laboratories that we use for drug testing have also begun offering other physical fitness tests, ability tests such as lift testing and other such things, which is really good for somebody with a manufacturing or perhaps like a warehouse situation where the routine functions of the job require them to be able to lift a certain weight, up above midsection or in some cases over their head. These types of tests are perfectly acceptable. The thing that you have to look for is it all boils down to the job relatedness factor. If you can show that the essential job duties of a particular position have these requirements, then any type of test designed to determine their fitness for that position is acceptable. Now, given the way the question was phrased, talking about like normal health and fitness, that may be venturing into territory which can sometimes run into situations with the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. So if you're trying to do some pre-screening for, say diabetes, you're trying to limit your health care coverage cost and your modifiers by having a healthy workforce, and you screen out individuals with particular diseases, that can start running afoul of the ADA. And typically that type of screening it's not all that common. Some states have even started to particularly pass restrictions on health testing and in some cases, believe it or not, genetic testing, screening out individuals that are genetically predisposed to certain diseases. Anything that is not job related typically will be frowned upon by either state legislatures or in a lot of cases the EEOC will comment on that. So if you're talking about screening for just general health conditions, I would just urge caution and have you do some additional research on that. But we do have physical tests and in some cases some medical tests that if you're interested in seeing what's available and doesn't necessarily run afoul of any state laws, we can certainly walk you through that. If you're interested, just contact me offline.
Excellent, Matt. Thank you. That's it for now.
Great. So were we on number 6? Let's see.
Yes, and
Yep.
now we're on
Okay.
to
So
7.
we're looking at power screening tip number 7. Proper adverse action procedures. In previous webinars, we really explored this subject in depth, so I'm going to kind of refer you back to some of those to get the real meaty stuff here, but I just want to let you know that part of the background screening process when you use a consumer reporting agency like Track One, the employer is obligated to give the employee, and in cases of residential screening, for apartments, give the applicants an opportunity to respond to anything negative that shows up on a background check report. The employment context is a little bit different. There's additional processes and obligations on part of the employers. And again, this all stems back to what we're seeing from the EEOC and other agencies. They're trying to remove unnecessary barriers to employment. And as you might expect, people with criminal records, have a difficult time in finding employment. And some will argue that's their own fault, but what the EEOC would prefer to see, and we've seen them increasingly take stances on this, they would like to see that each individual has their own fair shake at getting an interview and getting a chance at that position, and not just have a barrier to employment for that criminal record. So how other agencies, namely the FTC, which is responsible for administering the Fair Credit Reporting Act, have responded to that is this concept of adverse action. And it's designed to give the applicant an opportunity to respond to any negative information on their background check report. So as an employer, the way this process is supposed to work is if a applicant has a background check and negative information or something on their background check report might cause you to take a negative action, an adverse action, and that could be anything as simple as not hiring the person, or in the case of already employed individuals, not promoting or transferring or affording some other benefit. If that's the case, if the background check has negative information, on the employment side, prior to making that final decision, you're required to provide the employee or the applicant with some information. And on the front end, basically that is a copy of the report and a special document that the FTC provides, which is called a Summary of Your Rights under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So the idea is that by providing them a copy of the report, showing them what information that you're relying upon that might potentially make you take this negative decision, and this document that's called a Summary of Your Rights, that's designed to give the employee an opportunity to contact, typically us, the consumer reporting agency, to dispute something on their report. Maybe the report has confused them with their evil twin brother or some other John Smith, which is a common occurrence. And so that record doesn't belong to me, please take that off. And so that gives the employee the opportunity to do that. Contact us. We would make the change if indeed that record didn't belong to them. And then we would provide you, the employer, an updated copy of the report, and everything's great, and now that person can be hired, and that's one way the situation can go down. Probably equally as often, what will happen is the information gets reported, and the information is indeed correct, even after they've disputed it. And then, so the post-adverse action process in the case of employment kicks in. And in the case of the post-adverse action, that's our screening tip number 8. This is where it gets a little bit more complicated in that there's a very specific set of information that you have to provide on the post-adverse action. And some of you may be wondering, okay, so there's a pre-adverse action and a post-adverse action, so how much time do I have to allow in between those two? Well, there's nothing in the Fair Credit Reporting Act that actually specifies that amount of time, but through opinion letters that have been issued by the FTC, it's about 5 business days. And so the idea is that they have a meaningful opportunity to respond to the information. So again, what happens is if that information checks out and the report as issued stands, then the information that you are required to provide in the post-adverse action includes the name and the address and the telephone number of the consumer reporting agency, like track 1, a statement that basically indicates that the consumer reporting agency had nothing to do with the decision. We didn't make the decision, you did. And then just some other information that basically informs the consumer of their rights, how to obtain additional copies and of the credit report, and that they have a right to dispute it, even though they've kind of already done that on the front end. The good thing is, as a feature on the reports page of our background check system, we can generate these letters for you. With the click of a button, we can generate the pre-adverse action notice with all the information that's required to be in it. Same thing with the post-adverse action notice. So any reputable consumer reporting agency should be able to provide you with those types of tools. Sometimes you can even contract out that obligation and have the consumer reporting agency send out these notices. Just understand that it is technically the employer's legal obligation to send that information out. So if it doesn't get done, you're going to be on the hook for it, but likely in your contract with your screening company, you'll have addressed that. But anyway, that's the basic gist of the adverse action process. With the residential screening, if anybody is here that deals with apartment leases and screening their applicants, the only thing that really exists as far as the adverse action is the post-adverse action process. You don't have the pre, the wait, and the post. It's just the post-adverse action. But employers, again, because the agencies involved in this area are trying to reduce barriers to employment, those extra steps are in place. So I know that was a lot of information, so there may be some questions on that. So let's see what we have there.
Well, I'm going to probably hold the questions now to the end. I'm looking at the time and want to make sure people can get to their meetings at the top of the hour. So,
yep, we'll speed up a little bit. And believe it or not, that was the short version of the adverse action. The longer version, as I mentioned before, is contained in some of the other previous webinars. So moving on to number 9, power screening tip number 9, make it a policy to conduct an annual review. So a lot of employers, unfortunately, will kind of treat the background screening process more like an inoculation, a one-and-done approach, which is better than nothing, of course. But there are things that can happen subsequent to the employment process or the hiring process that you may want to be aware of. And commonly I get the question is, well, if the person goes to jail, I'm likely to notice that, right? And I say, yes, that's typically true, but there are a lot of things that can happen between arrest and potential incarceration that still rise to the level of a concern that you would need to be aware of. And so a rescreening is really in order, especially if you have people that are in financial positions. You can rerun that credit report. The other thing that you may want to do is taking a look at civil records. Some things that may not necessarily immediately show up on a credit report might show up in a civil situation first. Potential, a large judgment against them. There are a lot of things that you can discover in the course of other types of reports that might lead to at least not necessarily immediate action on the behalf of the employee, but some things that you just need to be aware of. And again, things that are committed in other jurisdictions may take some time to work their way through the courts, but this is the one situation where looking at arrest records might at least provide you some information, not necessarily anything that would be actionable immediately, but may provide you some information that just gives you a heads up as to the employee's long-term availability and viability at your organization. So I would just advise you to look at the background screening process as more of an ongoing initiative rather than just something that happens in the hiring context. So taking a look at number 10, screening tip number 10. A lot of times people overlook the cost involved, and it can be substantial if you deal with executive level employees, or if you're actually doing a quality screening, it can be $20, $25 a person, and that in some cases, especially what we're seeing now in our volunteer type situations, that's a cost that sometimes the organization just really isn't set up to absorb. So I would encourage you to just maybe be a little creative in the way that you handle the funding for your background screening. And there are ways that you can push that cost off onto the applicants themselves. On the employment context, that can sometimes be a little difficult. Certainly some states and municipalities have enacted laws that govern this process a little more closely. But especially if anybody is here kind of looking for information on volunteer screening, this is certainly one thing that you can do by passing that cost off onto your applicants. Same thing with the residential screening. There are some cases where that charge can be kind of accommodated and paid for by an application fee for the apartment. So just again, I would, if you explore this on the employment side, I would just encourage you to maybe give us a call, and we can give you some insight onto how that can happen. And as it'll also kind of depend upon which way the winds are blowing with respect to whether it's an employer's market or an employee's market, whether or not you could possibly charge fees. If it's a competitive marketplace out there for employees, then sometimes those types of fees can be too discouraging. But it is a possibility, so I just would have you at least consider that. So we made it through our 10 screening tips. I think now it's time for a bonus tip. And I just want to give you a little bit of information about what you would need to look for when you're considering hiring a background screening company. The number one thing I would have you take a look at, and Cynthia mentioned this in the introduction, Track One is one of 42 companies that have gone through this accreditation process. It's the best thing that this industry really has come up with in order to weed out the bad actors. The NAPBS has about 750 active members, 400 and something or so are actual true consumer reporting agencies. But really there's probably untold thousands of organizations out there that have set up shop and consider themselves to be a screening company. The barriers to entry have really never been lower in our organization, in our industry, because you can go out and buy a screening platform, buy data, and really be nothing more than a sales operation set up to do background screening. So things to look for are, one, would be membership in the National Association of Professional Background Screeners. Two, this accreditation standard, and it's really a complex standard. It's a bit like an ISO standard in its complexity. We had an auditor come out, an independent auditor, spend a full day at our organization. So anybody that's attained this accreditation, is adhering to a certain level of competency and compliance and standards. Legal understanding, because this is such a heavily regulated area. You would hope that at least somebody has a background in employment law, or has a legal degree, or at least can explain to you, the employer, the complexities involved in this area. The other thing to look for, and this will really, you have to dig down and ask these questions as you're talking to these consumer reporting agencies, but ask them whether or not they're producing verified reports. Too many of the organizations out there that are in this line of work are relying upon databases. These aggregated, they will call them national databases, trying to give you the warm and fuzzy feeling that they are indeed covering the entire country, but there really is no one database that covers the entire country. And the challenge with these databases is they can get stale very quickly. So ask these companies whether or not they are verifying the hits that come out of their databases. We of course do that. That's been a standard here for quite some time. So any hit that comes out of a database, we will actually go back and verify with the original reporting jurisdiction to make sure that that record is still up to date. As I mentioned, a lot of companies will go out there and just buy a screening platform off the shelf, and while that's not necessarily a bad thing, it does allow people to get into this business very quickly without a lot of expertise. So ask them whether or not they own their own platform, have created their own platform. Same thing with their data. Again, you can quickly tell the difference between an organization that's just quickly ramped up in this space from somebody that's committed to it for the long haul. And then technology solutions. Many of you out there are dealing with applicant tracking systems, property management software. You need to look for an organization that has the ability to integrate into those platforms to, one, save you some data entry time. Imagine being able to go into your current applicant tracking system or your human resources information system, push a button, and use all that data to magically come over to Track One to start the background screening. We can do that. We have 4 full-time developers on site. So look for organizations that can match that in terms of their technology solutions. And then obviously the high quality service. Everyone deserves that. And unfortunately, there are some rather large corporate providers out there that have offshored and outsourced everything to the extent where it's difficult to get people on the phone. So I always like doing a phone test on anybody that we're about to use as a vendor. If I can't pick up the phone and get somebody on the line, in a very short order, it makes me think twice about how quickly I can get to somebody in case of a problem. So those are the bonus tips. And so I will, the takeaway points, this is just pretty much a summary of what we've seen. So if you want to come back and view this online, you can do the takeaways. But I want to give you, Cynthia, time to kind of tell us about what's coming up next and get people out of here on time.
Okay, Matt, that sounds good. We had one question I think you can answer very quickly with a yes or no, and that question is for
Sure.
annual reviews you suggested that people go ahead and go through for their current employees, their existing employees, they do annual reviews, background
Uh-huh.
screening reviews. And the question is, do they need to ask permission for those additional background
That's an
screening?
awesome question, and it's one of my favorite ones because it really shows people are thinking about the process. The answer is if your original disclosure and authorization form informs the employee that future screening can be done throughout the tenure of or the duration of their employment, then you're totally okay with that. Now, I will warn you, California, like in all situations, is a little bit different. I do believe California requires permission each time a screen is run, but in most cases, informing somebody up front that screening is done on an ongoing basis is sufficient. But if you're not of a sufficient size to make that complicated to ask each time, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to have that, but it is possible to do that.
Okay, good. Glad that we asked that question. Excuse me. Excuse me, got something in my throat for some reason. We will invite Nancy and or Matt back. Just a minute, folks. Things floating in the air, I guess. We'll ask them back for April 22nd on another round, another webinar on background screening frequently asked questions. And they will give you the real questions and the real answers, and we have no doubt of that. If you want to, you can contact, if you need to, especially if you have questions after today or watching any of the webinars, you can contact Track One, Nancy Roberts, directly. Here's a phone number for you, 1-800-600-8999, and their URL is very easy, www.track1, track-1, I should say, .com, and that is a 1, not an I. So track-1.com. Now, next week, we'll be hosting Kenna Lewis back on her popular Social Media Essentials series, and this time she'll be talking about LinkedIn's must-dos. Then we'll have Dr. Jeff back with Cycles of Beautiful Loving, and then we'll have our new popular Emily Shoup, who will come back and talk with us. She's talking through her Shoup Shift, which is a really great way to charge up your team and your leaders in your culture, and this time it's going to be communication skills that work. So there's your April 1st through April 22nd, the Tuesdays at noon Central. We'll invite you back. We ask that you become a member and watch our full webinar series on any of these popular topics, and it's on demand at businessperformanceusa.org. It's free, guys. All you need to do is sign in and become a member, and then you have the opportunity to watch any of the webinars. And you can email me directly at Cynthia at businessperformanceusa.org if you have questions about your workplace that we can help you with. Folks, we thank you for your time and your attention today. We hope you found this beneficial webinar with regard to background screening. I know I always do, and we look forward to hosting you back. Go out and make it a great day. And with that, I'm going to end the webinar. And thank you so much, Matt. We really appreciate your insights today.
Thank you.